So we've mentioned the word archaeoastronomy a couple of times in our conversation tonight. And Mondo, if you will, break down what archaeoastronomy is and how is it used and where can we find it and what's it for?
Archaeoastronomy, it's archaeology and astronomy mixed together. And really, this has got to be one of the most ancient concepts that has existed since the beginning of mankind. Um, so what generally what you see is, first of all, you got to have an understanding of the basics of astronomy, the natural order, constellations, other things, understanding the background. Certainly, the Mazzaroth does appear in the Bible, in the book of Job and other places. And so we recognize that people have been looking up at the heavens for a long time. Well, when you come into archaeoastronomy, what has been recognized is, for example, we'll take the Octagon Mound as an example in Ohio. And we were there just a couple of years ago, and we were doing some documentaries there. And one of the things that we were discussing there was recognizing that many places, the mounds included or other things, I'll get back to the Octagon Mound in a minute because that's a little bit more advanced. So typically, what you might have is you might have a site where you have some pillars or some towers or some columns or whatever, and it's lined up with either the equinox
Hmm.
or it's going to be lined up with the solstices. So in the wintertime, the sun is very low on the horizon, and this it's again in the southeast. You'll see the sun appear rise very, very low on December 21st. Well, then, as we know, as you go through the time of the year in March or in the fall, in September, as an example, you will see the sun rise up basically directly east. Well, then in the summertime, it's rising in the northeast. And so, what cultures have done is they've made these connections between the archaeology or the structure, the engineering, so that a certain thing will line up with one of those three. And that's I would say that's very basic. It's sometimes you'll
Right.
have where they'll build a tunnel or a doorway, and the sun on, let's say, the sun setting on the December or maybe the summer solstice, where the sun will light up right down the tunnel, and it'll only appear once a year on the specific spot. As the sun goes down, it's at a certain spot in. Okay, so that's one angle. Well, at the Octagon Mound, it's a little bit more advanced in that the Octagon Mound not only does it have some of those features as it relates to the sun, but it's set up to show you what's called the lunar standstill schedule, 18.62 years. And the way that the moon works in its rising is it goes on this 18.62-year cycle where it'll actually rise farther northeast than the farthest time that the sun will rise in the summer.
Right.
And so, but it takes the sun takes a year, basically to go back and forth to those points where the moon, it'll go there and it'll go actually all the way to the southeast, even far further than the winter solstice. So this is kind of fascinating because when you look at how the Octagon Mound was designed, it's set up to mark both of those situations, which again, you would have to build over 18.6 years. So, and then there's other things that we could talk about as relates to some of the mathematics. And of course, L.A. Marzulli has done a lot of documentation on this at different mounds. Um, sorry, using trigonometry and other forms. So this was advanced, something that you would need paper, in your brain or something you're writing on. It's not something you just sit there and do. So that creates a lot of challenge for some of the conventional ideas that this was all done by Native Americans, which I think even some people like Brad Lepper, he's a great example of a traditional Mesoamerican archaeologist. And he actually admitted it just recently that, well, there's something else at work here. So maybe these guys really did have advanced, even though we don't advanced understanding of mathematics and archaeoastronomy, even though there's no evidence that they do, but we clearly can't deny the evidence. So
So,
that's
so
kind of the
what we,
basics.
yeah, that is. And so what we have here is we have a 50-acre site, and you and I were there with L.A. Marzulli and Fritz Zimmerman a couple of years ago. We have a 50-acre site. This Octagon Mound is huge. First of all, how did they survey this mound? And then where did they get the knowledge? They didn't sit there for, you said 18.62 years. They didn't sit there and put a stick in the ground and mark this thing over time. They had some knowledge that came from somewhere. So what are your thoughts on that? Where did they get this knowledge?
That's really the question. And so this is where, again, I'm doing research for a book right now, just discussing the basically the Smithsonian and some of the early, like Squire and Davis. They came out with their book in 1849 as it relates to the mounds, and they are very, very clear in their understanding of what they were recognizing. These are great scholars, and they're actually very complimented by the Smithsonian even to this day. But they are crystal clear that they believe that there was a previous civilization, not the modern Native Americans, if you want to say modern in the last 2,000 years or 1,500 years. There was a
Right.
previous prehistoric mound builders civilization. And so they recognize that, wow, what they were able to accomplish is far superior than anything related to modern Native Americans. And so the question is, you have these two groups. So where did this information come from? Well, it certainly didn't come from the modern Native American groups, which is not an insult to them. They'll tell you we didn't build the mounds. But there was another group. Now it's not conventional today. People have gone away from that whole idea, but it's still there in the original writings. And I think that there's a different agenda at work here rather than just the science of the archaeology.
Right. And,
Brent,
you
can
know,
I in
yeah, go
here?
ahead.
Just quick question. So, an ancient culture developed this over, I said, 18 years. What is the benefit of a culture to do this? I understand, like, it takes quite a bit of mathematics and time, effort, energy to accomplish measuring out this time period. But what would knowing this information and doing this benefit a culture?
I'll,
Um,
I'll give my I'll give my answer and I'll let Mondo speak to that. Um, what I would say is this is a religious component of some sort. I believe, religion throughout history has been a giant motivating factor to get people to cooperate in such a manner that they would have to done. I mean, we're talking about moving millions of metric tons of dirt here. I mean, volumes of dirt, large volumes of dirt, and to make these mounds and these different berm walls. I mean, the berms are like what? They're about 20 feet tall, Mondo, and about the
Oh,
moats are about 12 or 15 feet deep. There was a lot of earth moved at this site, and I think there was a religious component there. I think we can see some of this. The Bible speaks about pagan religion to some extent, and I believe that some of the things that we find in these earthworks or incorporated into them, some of the practices like Mondo mentioned, the openings in our tunnels or gateways where on a certain day the sun shines through. I think that had to do with sun god worship. I think a lot of this is tied to what the Bible calls Baal worship. I think there's different variations of it. And I think somehow or another it came from the Levant area and made its way over here because a lot of let's say in England around Stonehenge, a lot of those mound sites, and there's several in England all over. There's several Stonehenges actually, but a lot of those mound sites look identical to some of the things that you'd find in Ohio Valley. Mondo.
oh, yeah. When you asked about what is the benefit, well, it's interesting that um, if you look at the what it took, for example, again, like Cahokia, just millions, and millions of cubic feet of material, and how many thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of man hours to make it done. You don't do that because you're bored. I mean, you're living out, subsistence living, and so the only reason why you would prioritize something like that would be, as Brent said, there's a religious value. There is no beneficial value in the sense of wasting stuff like that. You could be hunting, you could be farming, you could be doing those things. But you know, even as us as Christians, why do we fast? Why do we deny ourselves for a lot of things? There's no real benefit in some of those denials. In fact, it ruins some of the pleasures that we might enjoy as a sinful person. But we do it because of religious reasons. We do it because we believe that's what God wants from us. And so, in the same way, they would develop these rituals and these cultures in order to worship the heavens. And this is why in the Book of Deuteronomy and other places, God is so adamant against worshiping the host of heaven, the sun, the moon, the stars, even the planets to those degrees. And so you would have a lot of those things, especially in Babylonian. But as we know, as Brent said, that stuff came over and it's here. And so we for us, we do may, or at least we're open to the idea that this was knowledge given to either Nephilim offspring or other giants of some kind as it relates in the Bible. And as we've talked before, some of the stuff that we see in the book of Enoch, the book of First Enoch, which again we know is not scripture, but it's just interesting that it tells you the traditions of what you have in Second Temple Judaism, where these fallen angelic beings were giving knowledge, astronomy, all through the book of First Enoch. You see this where they're telling the laws and the orders of the heavens. I mean, the word astronomy means the laws of the star. That's what astronomy means, and so they were giving that. So that's what I would say is it a benefit? It's not always a benefit for sure in the sense of the practical ways, but it's a benefit in order it brings a cohesion there from an anthropological perspective as it relates to religion and culture and society.
Very good.
Yeah, thank you.
Nick, any questions? Comments?
Yeah, I want to isn't it fair to say, I feel like I heard this recently, but pretty much every single civilization had some form of sun worship. Am I correct in saying that?
I would say a lot of them did. There was different variations of different religions, just like we have denominations today. We have a lot of people that saying that they're Christians and they're following Christ, but there's different variations of that. I think you had that in pagan worship also, Mondo.
Absolutely. If you go back to certainly in the oldest religions, Sumeria, Egypt, there's no doubt that the sun, it's almost universal, had a place as either, again, an Egyptian being part of the original creator, being Ra, or one of the first creations, or everything emanates from the sun, which, again, according to that kind of primitive thinking, even though they were very brilliant, I mean, we know that the Babylonians are the ones that gave us, the 60, what is sesdecimal or something system, whatever, circles, stuff like that. So they definitely had some understanding, but where'd they get that knowledge? That's the fascinating thing about it, which again, we just keep our options open.
Right.